Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to MythVision Podcast. I have a legend with us today, Dr. John Dominic Crossan. He likes me to call him Dom. How are you, my friend?
Very, very good, Derek. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to just last second jump on here and have some fun. I really appreciate it. You've been on the channel multiple times and I've kind of read your background and your CV and told about your history, but let's be honest. Anyone who knows New Testament studies, New Testament critical thinking and scholarship and whatnot, they're aware of who you are. Can you just, for those who may not know who you are, let's just give them something here. What would you say you're most well known for in history?
My best known what? Say it again.
What you're most well known for.
Oh, it's for writing the historical Jesus, the life of a Mediterranean Jewish peasant in 1991. And what happened, quite frankly, is it came out in November and Peter Steinfeld's New York Times was looking for a Christmas story. So John Meyer had started his 7-volume Marginal Jew. I think we both thought, everyone thought that was his book. We didn't know it was volume 1 of about 7. He's up to 5 at the moment. So Peter Steinfeld said, perfect, there's my Christmas story. I have a priest and an ex-priest. Both of them studied at the Biblical Institute. One is liberal, one is conservative. No insults. So I have my Christmas story. I don't have to ask all sorts of other people. And he plunked us on the front page of the New York Times, December, maybe the 23rd or 24th of 1991. All of a sudden, a book of, $30, I don't know, was it 500 pages? I don't even remember, which was intended for scholars. It was not intended for normal human beings. Was put in the front page of the New York Times and went through the roof. And to put it very bluntly, it sort of invented the publicity of the historical Jesus. Now, we've been working on that in the Jesus seminar, but all of a sudden there was a big book out there and everyone wanted an historical Jesus. So it was that book, but let me be very clear. If Peter Steinfeld hadn't put it on the front of the New York Times, it might have died a born.
So which one is this? The historical Jesus here, right? The life of a Mediterranean.
See there, life of a Mediterranean Jewish peasant. And if you look at the picture on there, it's from a sarcophagus, and it's Jesus. He looks a little bit like a magician. He has actually, his right hand is pointed towards Lazarus. It's pretty obvious. Even if you were a Roman and you had no idea of the story, you say, this guy looks like he's bringing somebody back to life out of the dead. The guy's all mummified. You see, he's wrapped up and he's coming hoppity hop like a rabbit out of his tomb. And Jesus is pointing at him. So anyone looking at this, now, I don't think for a second that ever happened. Let me be very clear. In fact, I think John's gospel is mocking the whole idea. But I wanted that for a visual moment that summarized the whole book. Here is Jesus bringing life out of death for a community composed of, here, 2 men and 2 women. I thought this is what the book is about, life out of death. So no, I don't think it ever happened, but this is what I'd put on the evening news if I was at the time of Jesus advertising Jesus. This guy brings life out of death. Now, whether you think he literally took hoppity hop out of the tomb, fully like an Egyptian mummy, No, I didn't believe that for a second. But that's how I read things. This is the perfect summary of claims about this life. He brings life out of death for people, and people who are women as well as men. So that was the book. As it says, a great big book, but I think what made it popular, if I want to use that word in quotation marks, was, of course, the New York Times. And then I immediately wrote a small book called Jesus, a Revolutionary Biography, which was an apology to all those who had paid $30 and got to maybe page 10 and quit. I know where Sarah, my beloved wife's marker, stopped moving around, I don't know, page 25 or something. It got there and never moved again. So it was a culmination. Actually, I've been writing about the historical Jesus since 1973 in Parables. The Challenge of the Historical Jesus came out in 73. So I've been working on this all of those years, and this was kind of the grand finale. So, to understand the history, that's
I imagine, and I haven't read all your work, Dr. Dom. I'm just going to call you Dom like you told me to.
please.
I haven't read all your works, and I plan on doing so because I hope we can open a can of worms on all of this over time, you and me, and getting our audience acquainted with your material so they can get it. But I have read Render Unto Caesar, the entire book, multiple times. And it is a recent book. I really enjoyed it. I feel like this particular publication is kind of obviously covering new ground pertaining to this coin, and you've traveled to the places where a lot of this material is at, in the Sea of Galilee or the Lake of Tiberias and stuff. The way that you piece a picture together of a potential first century image of this peasant from Nazareth, if you will, from the Galilee. Is this kind of your pinnacle of all that you've worked on, in a sense of, here's a pinnacle of my work on the historical Jesus?
I think honestly that's fair, Derek, because I haven't ever experienced in my own life, at least, a huge dislocation. I'm completely changed. From the very beginning, the doctorate that I got was, I know you put down a PhD. My doctorate was in theology. I got it in Europe, in Ireland, so it was a DD, a Doctor of Divinity. They used the Latin form divinity rather than theology, which is Greek. So I got a doctor of, so I learned theology first. Then I went to Rome for 2 years of specialization in exegesis at the Biblical Institute in Rome. This would be 59 to 61. And then 2 more years at the École Biblique in Jerusalem, then in Jordan, 65 to 67, for 2 years in archaeology. So that's sort of you want to call it my credentials. But what actually was important for me, honestly, okay, I went to classes, I passed them, I got my diplomas, fine. I was in Europe, all over Europe, from Portugal to East Berlin, in the 50s. I didn't realize it at the time. This is my education. Yeah, I'm going to school, I'm getting all this lovely stuff, and it's nice. And then in the 60s, I didn't realize when I was in Jordan, which meant I could travel anywhere. I wasn't in Israel. Jerusalem was then in Jordan. So I could be Iraq, Iran. I could go from Nineveh to the Basra. I had no idea. I am getting a magnificent education outside the classroom. I'd been everywhere, man. And I didn't know it until I got back and started realizing, hey, I've stood on the top of the Grand Pyramid, in 1960, December of 19, I have to think for a second. December 1965, I was in Egypt. You could go out to the pyramids. There was nobody there. There was no guards. There was no nothing. Myself and another guy, 2 idiots, climbed all the way up to the top of the Grand Pyramid.
That's awesome.
And we're sore for a week afterwards, very carefully. But when I look at all my credentials that you write, you read them, and what really impresses me, honestly, is to be able to go to Ur and stand on the top of the ziggurat. I mean, I didn't know it at the time. I was just, a young guy seeing everything. And now I look back, I had a magnificent education outside the classroom. So to be honest with you, that's important for me. Almost any place I talk about, almost any place, I've been there. All over the Middle East and North Africa too, at least Egypt, Tunis, Morocco. Never got to Algeria or Libya. But anyway, so it really has given me a sense of the feel for these places.
And that you can't replace with pen and paper or sitting in a classroom. That's what's amazing.
Honestly, if I had been here, and I was in a monastery, first of all, and I entered the monastery in 1950 in Ireland. I was 16. So all of this was my monastic superiors telling me what to do. I made no choices until I left the monastery 19 years later. They decided, you're going to be a scholar because you got 5 years of Greek, 5 years of Latin, and a boarding school. And who else is that? You're going to be a scholar. Okay. You're going to be a professor? Okay. You're going to go here to do this? Okay. You're going to here to do that. It's like being in the army. You know, you do what you're told. Now, they were smart superiors, so they figured out what was good for me.
Right.
What was good for them. So as I look back on that, thank God for it. Now, I left the monastery after 19 years, and that's why I took my monastic name is Dominic. It has no civil standing whatsoever. John Crossan's on my passport driving license. But I wanted to make a comment that thank you for everything I'm taking with me. Now, I gave up celibacy because I think it's vastly overrated. But anyway, you know, 19 years is enough. But I think
Wow.
maybe, you know, if you spend your adolescence in the monastery, maybe get 19 extra years at the end.
Maybe. Let's hope, right? Let's hope. Dom, you're amazing. I always enjoy talking to you and learning from you. And you know, Dr. James Tabor highly recommended you early on. And I was kind of new fishing my way through the scholarly world. And he was like, look, Dom has been there. He has seen it. He's taken the pictures. He's super. And sure enough, when I talked to you, that's exactly what you said. And so I will be in October in Israel with James Tabor and my good friend, Gnostic informant Neil. And we're going to be putting together a kind of a course of walking in the footsteps of where the historical Jesus would have been, and going to like Pontius Pilate's throne and like, you name it, where he would have made his judgments and stuff like that, you know, all of this stuff. And so I'm looking forward to that. We do have a super chat. I want our audience to, you know, take the time to like this video. Also take the time to go get a copy. I'm not just saying this. Highly recommend the book. It's super interesting. Even if you say at the end of the day, well, I'm not interested in that particular topic. He covers so much on Nero. What is it? How do you pronounce it? Redivivus.
Redivivus or
The
resurrection.
resurrection. Yeah. And
Resurrection, let's say.
you
I mean,
really need to
die. He didn't
huh?
die. So Redivivus is kind of not right. That's back to life. It's a return of Nero from the east. That's basically what it's about. He doesn't come back to life because he didn't die. That's the claim.
I like how you show that the formula of this mythos, and let's not say mythos as in like completely fabricated, like there is some historical base here, but there is this imagination in the people that Nero's not dead, and then he will return. And sure enough, the author John on the island of Patmos is writing saying, and Jesus will return. And he uses the same motif that is being used for Nero for Jesus to come and judge and destroy the enemies, etc.
We can imagine in our day and age in America how you could have an emperor who is out of office, shall we say, to keep it general, claiming he's coming back. It has happened to other rulers. So that's what happens to Nero. It's hard for us to understand it, but that's what happened.
We got Scott Daniel. He did super chat us. He says, I gave up celibacy because it's vastly overrated. John Dominic Crossan, 9/4/22. Everybody remember this moment. This is history. This is awesome. So
But
Scott Daniel. Oh,
I
sorry.
tried it, Scott, for 19 years. I gave it a fair try, you know.
Look, honest question. We're getting down into the men's locker room for a second here. Would you say you're way happier now than what you were when you were celibate?
Now, let me be very clear, because this is important. As a monk, I became a monk, actually. I wasn't pushed by my parents or anything else, but I'd been in boarding school since I was 11. So I'd been running my own life. My father said that to me when I told him he said, well, you know what you're doing. So what it was for me, honestly, was excitement. It was nothing about giving up your life. I was 15. You know, I didn't have a life to give up. But this was excitement. I mean, I was going to enter an order which was all over the world. I was going off either to Rome or Louvain or America. This was exciting. So that's what I would now. You take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Poverty means everything is owned in common. You're not really living poor. The real vow that broke it for me was obedience, because in 1969, when the Pope declared, what was it, Paul VII, whoever it was, I forget popes, he declared that the only legitimate birth control method for Roman Catholics was either abstinence or rhythm. Now we're back at this same thing all over again now.
Mhm.
But that was the only thing they could do. Any other form of birth control was a mortal sin for Roman Catholics. In 1969, August, I was invited to go on the NPR television in Chicago and debate that with a doctor, a real doctor, an MD, who was claiming that rhythm always works. Of course, it always works. My sister in Ireland had 6 kids. I knew it didn't. Anyway, I was on with him and I said, I'm a theologian. I went on with a tie. I didn't have my collar on. I'm a theologian. The Pope is wrong. He simply is wrong. It's not a mortal sin to use birth control. In fact, it may well be a requirement of conscience. I actually said, you know, our president Nixon is in Vietnam, and I think he's wrong too. So the Pope is the Pope, and I think he's wrong. I thought it was nice, you know, balanced. Annoy everyone type. Well, the Cardinal Archbishop of Chicago told my superior, 1 week, I'm out of the diocese. I said, 1 week, I'm out of the order. So I left. Actually, what broke it was the vow of obedience, not the vow of celibacy. So I said, okay, I can't be an honest scholar and say what I think and be an obedient priest with a vow of religion, a vow of obedience. I just can't be both.
Wow.
I'm not going to take a vow of obedience and you will tell me, don't say that. And I will believe it, but not say it. So some people can do that. I said, okay. I did it officially. I asked permission from Rome for a dispensation for my vows. I did it politely by the book. The joke the joke among my friends was that there was a rescript waiting in the Vatican, hoping I might ask to get out someday so they could get rid of me. Because I got it almost immediately.
Wow. They had it ready.
Yeah, it was dated the 4th of July 19, what did I say? I have always to think of this. It was 69, 70, whenever it was. But I got it immediately. So I was out. I was dispensed from my vows, and I went to DePaul University and became a professor, and have been magnificently happy at DePaul University for 26 years until early retirement. And I took early retirement to write and to lecture, to be honest with you.
And you've been having fun ever since. We have a super chat here, just so everybody knows. I'm going to take these super chats. If you want to ask a question, you want to challenge Dom, go for it. Be respectful is all I ask. Me and Dom talk about that. And usually I don't have a problem with hecklers. But anyway, first one is by Scott Daniel. You often allude to a God of non-violent redistributive justice in Jesus' teaching or Jesus's teaching. Do you identify this God with Yahweh, or is he, she more universal?
Okay, Scott, let me answer on 2 stages. And if I forget the second one, come at me. As far as I'm talking about the biblical God, I do presume that they are talking about Yahweh as the God of the universe. I think they're talking about a supreme being in our term, who created the universe, who was there before it, who could exist without it. But it is the God of the Old Testament who is the God of nonviolent distributive justice. You can find that all over the Torah. The logic of the Sabbath day, the Sabbath year, the Sabbath jubilee is to try and restore the earth to a fair share for everyone. So retributive justice is the basic meaning of justice in the Bible. It's a fair share for everyone. Now, for me, today, I do not imagine the term God as a supreme being, but I might say the supremacy of being, or I might put it another way to be clear. I take evolution. I mean that in the ordinary sense that everyone uses it, the Big Bang and everything else. I take that absolutely seriously as a dominant ethical imperative. I think the reason empires come and go is not because of pride or because of God's judgment in Daniel 7, though I respect that as a way of saying it, but because it's against evolution. Because evolution is basically, as I see it, a fair distributive justice process. Now, I don't like it, by the way. I don't think viruses and volcanoes should have a fair distributive justice. I would try to get rid of them. and a few other things like hurricanes and everything else if I was running the place. But I would like to put it this way as a challenge. If we put it as the old joke, a Catholic, a Protestant, and a Jew went into a pub. You know the old jokes that start like that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Let's imagine the pub was on the 60th floor of a high rise. Let's imagine they go out, and let's imagine they jump. What is going to happen is they will all be killed. That is because gravity is fair. Gravity does not cheat. So I would ask us, if we want to have debates, and I'm not against them, if you want to have debates about atheism and theism, by all means, have them. I'm not particularly interested. If you want to argue monotheism against polytheism, or this God against that, but please, please take evolution seriously. It's not negotiable. It's not negotiable. And if you want to know what I'm really talking about, I'm talking about climate change. We cannot buck evolution the way we've been bucking it for years and think we'll get away with it. You know, when we talk about God, we can talk about, oh, there'll be mercy, there'll be forgiveness. God will forgive. There is no forgiveness from evolution. The only forgiveness from evolution is the time within which we can change. That is the mercy of evolution. We are capable of changing. We are not committed to plastic in the ocean. We're not committed to it by some natural instinct that when I see a plastic bottle, I have to throw it in the ocean. So by all means, we can talk about the biblical God, and I will talk about that. I have no problem with that. And Jesus is in continuity, and I only understand him in that continuity. But at the back of my mind, what I'm really watching, I'm watching with deadly seriousness, is evolution.
So it sounds to me, and I could be wrong, kind of like a Spinoza approach. Nature kind of is what it is, and so the essence of existence and being would be the divine in a sense. But it sounds like we're using different terms to describe the natural world and the order of existence, and we're just calling it God, or we're calling it this, or we're calling it that. Whereas really, existence itself and everything around us, we're just kind of using different terms. Is that what you would say?
No, I want to raise the issue.
Okay.
Let us let me put it bluntly, don't take me literally. Let us for 2,000 years avoid the term God. Let us spend the next 2,000 years focusing with deadly seriousness on evolution. And all we know about it, that any scientist will tell you. But try and think of what it's doing to our world. Because what I see is that our species, Homo, I'm going to say Homo ludens, I almost wanted to say, you know, Homo sapiens, the wise Homo. It's a gorgeous oxymoron. Homo sapiens came out of Africa. Now we're arguing 70,000, maybe 140,000 years ago. Our species. What I see we did is we declared war on the world. We declared war on the environment. We declared war on other species. We declared war on ourselves. And now the accounting has come due. Now we have to pay the bill for that. And we can see what's happening in global warming, we call it, or climate change, whatever you want to call it, which we are accelerating. It might happen by itself, but at the speed we could handle. Other species and wars with ourselves, with weapons ever getting more dangerous. Now, I see evolution watching us, as it were. I could personify it and shaking its head and saying, I would like us to focus on that. Now we can ask, and I'm willing to do it because I've done it my own. Is the God simply another name for evolution? Is it simply another name for it? Because evolution is transcendental. Make no mistake about it. We can cooperate with it. We can't change it. It's not like the traffic system. We could decide if we wanted that the British were right and let's drive on the other side of the road. We could change it. We go crazy and kill one another, but we could do it. But no, we can cooperate with evolution or we cannot cooperate. But it's not going to make any difference. So I want I want us to take that seriously. Then we can ask, is God something like when we try to meditate about the Big Bang, and that's the word I use, meditate? The Big Bang, we can't answer why. I don't have any why there is being. I can't fall back, well, God created it, that's fine. I don't know why there is being rather than nothing. I can't imagine ever getting to an answer.
Mm-hmm.
It's a subject of meditation for me. I might as well tell you, by the way, I spent 19 years studying meditation in the monastery. I also took that with me. I can meditate very easy. It's second nature. It's very easy. 19 years, it's really easy. And a lot of times I do try to meditate on the Big Bang.
Well,
Seriously.
Dom, I have a live stream coming up this week, Tuesday, with an academic, Matthew Munger. And in fact, the subject is man-made religion, right? We're talking about the Bible. It's kind of funny the way that you painted it, because I put a small little paragraph to give people a taste in this live stream. Neil from Gnostic Informant and Dr. Matthew Munger. And I was going to have Neil do it. I got to update this description because I'm actually in my new location. But Dr. Matthew Munger will discuss how the ancient Israelite religion and other ancient Near Eastern people personified natural phenomena by anthropomorphizing things they didn't understand. And so you'll get the opportunity to ask him. But it's kind of interesting. In another way, we're saying what you said. They're looking at the natural world. They're trying to explain it. They anthropomorphize it, give it, persona like we have. And then, of course, they're trying to understand the world around them. But they didn't know why the volcano erupted. They didn't know why disease or famine exists. And now we do. So we're kind of shifting. Now that we have science that can explain some of this stuff, we shift that out of the superstitious paradigm, so to speak. And we still have other questions that are unsolvable or we don't have the answers to, as you're describing.
Let me be very careful here. I think religion, all religion, are what I'm going to call, with respect to Wordsworth, odes on the intimations of evolution. Evolution wasn't invented around the year, we all got excited about Darwin. Darwin's not the excitement. The excitement is evolution, the whole universe. If the whole universe was something else and we were simply descended from simian ancestors, that would be something. But we're part of a gigantic operation. So when I hear nature, I tend honestly to cringe a little, because a lot of people use nature to mean gorgeous sunsets and lovely dawns and beautiful forests and all the stuff we put on our, what it's like. When I say nature, I don't say nature, I say evolution. And I'm terribly aware of evolution means, as I said, the viruses and the volcanoes, just as much as the lovely sunsets and the lovely dawns. So I want to take that seriously as an imperative, because when I've explained that we've invented God, maybe, well, if you've invented God, I can relax. God doesn't exist, so he, she doesn't make any difference. God doesn't exist, so I'm home free. You're not home free. In fact, God was much better deal, because God had mercy and forgiveness in the Bible. So God could forgive you your stuff, and God was merciful even when God punished. That's a good deal. I have not the slightest evidence that evolution forgives you, except in the sense, which I've just mentioned, that we can change. That's how I see forgiveness. And how I see mercy is that we always have a certain time within which it's possible before it's too late. If we pollute the earth and change the climate too much, there could be a point when we can't get back, when it will be at least catastrophic, and would make anything in the Bible of those, apocalyptic stuff like Sunday picnics and, or a bad thunderstorm. The real stuff is going to be what we're imagining if we accelerate climate change faster than we can adapt to it or change from it. So I want us to make certain that we don't just give us the out that, as I just said, I do not believe, I'm telling you where I am, in a supreme being independent of the universe, who created the universe and could have not or done it. And it's a very good explanation. It tells me that the universe is just like my table here. Somebody made it. I don't know who made it, but so that's common sense. But once you begin to know about evolution, that's not common sense, because that raises the issue that said, why is there being? And granted, there is being. Why is it dynamic? Why couldn't it just be static? Everything is there. And why is it kind of fair? Couldn't it be prejudiced in favor of me or somebody? So I really want us not to use religion or God to let us off the Titanic, as it were.
I don't blame you. Okay.
Go on. No.
Inquisitive Mind, thank you for the super chat. The Ghost of MythVision. Did Arabs also visit the Jewish temple before 60 AD?
Okay, did Arabs also visit the Jewish temple before? I can't see the slightest reason why not. Let me put it that way. Here's what I'm thinking. What we do know is that Herod the Great had two world-class building operations going on at the same time before his death at the end of in 4 BCE. He was building this gigantic port at Caesarea on the coast. The port was called Sebastos, by the way. We really should say he had a port with a city, not he had a city with a port. He built a port, so it's Sebastos. Now, who is he expecting to come into that thing? Business people, of course. Meanwhile, up in the temple, he's building a giant 5 football fields long, 3 football fields across, 15 football fields. What's it called? The Court of the Gentiles. Where did you think that he was convinced that he had, and he's quite right, the greatest temple in the ancient world in size and everything else? It kind of beat out Diana, which was the first big marble temple, but it was stunning. I would want to travel there just to see it. I don't mean it as a Jew going on pilgrimage. As a pious pagan, I'd want to visit it. And of course, I'd want to pay my dues there and everything else. If I was an Arab, would I do it? I would think, of course. When Paul went to the Gentiles, the first ones he went to were the Nabatean Arabs, right next door, right, south of Damascus and Petra. So I would say, of course. And please think of that for a moment. You had to come in the southern doors. When you're in Israel, I'm sure Jim will show you the steps. You can still see the steps going up to the southern doors. They had to go down underneath the esplanade there, and they came up into the court of the Gentiles. No Jew could get to the court of the Jews. Well, a priest could, of course, but no ordinary secular Jew in the first century could get to the court of the Jews without going to the court of the Gentiles. So the priests could come in from the west on their own little route, but that's separate. As far as we know, they went under, and they went through the Royal Arcade there. So I would say yes, maybe in their hundreds.
Thank you.
By the way, when I was there myself, what was it, 65 to 67, whatever it was, you could enter into the Dome of the Rock. You could go walk inside the Dome of the Rock. There was no problem with anyone going right up onto the mount, because I was there before the 67 war.
Wow.
I ran the day before. It started on a Monday, and I got out of there on Sunday morning at 6 a.m. Not because I was smart, but because our consuls and our ambassadors all said, you guys stay after next week. It's probably coming. So get out now or you're on your own. So we took our briefcase and ran. We could tell. I mean, it wasn't genius. Everyone was boarding up or not boarding up, but putting sticky paper across their windows and everything. So we knew that the 5-day war was coming.
Wow. Thank you for that answer. Dan Jacobs, thank you for the super chat. Dan, John Dom is one of my favorites. Do you think that the followers of James and Peter, as opposed to Paul, saw Jesus as synonymous with Yahweh?
I think the proper answer to that is I don't know. I don't know what language they were using, but let me push it a little bit. In the first century, Every if you look at the coin on the outside of my book, the coin on the outside of the book, and this is not a cheap advertisement, says Theos Sebastos Kaiser. That means that Caesar is God. Theos, you can start it up. It's going what, counterclockwise. You see it up there. Let me
Right.
see. You see you can barely see it there. I'm jiggling my cursor over it. Theos Sebastos Kaiser, and that would be God, Augustus Caesar. Okay, now that was on the coins. I can imagine. Please let me underline imagine. And if I found it out to be true, it wouldn't bother me. I can imagine some Jew, a pious Jew, looking at that and saying, well, as far as I'm concerned, this guy here who's the Messiah, I think he's God on earth. He probably would say Son of God rather than God. But that's what he means. That's what he means. If this is the revelation of God, the image of God, their language, the Son of God, and son should be taken not so much masculine as heir, H-E-I-R, heir of God, then that's what it would mean. So, I mean, in the same way, the Romans, when they said Caesar was God, do you think if you actually lynched him or assassinated him, which some of them were planning to do, by the way, they would say, oh, God is dead? No, they'd have simply said, for me, he's not a revelation of God. For me, he's not an image of God. For me, he's not God in sandals. So this is the language of the first century. It's not
You've
my
even said on the phone with me that when you debated a Muslim back in the day, you pointed out that if Muhammad existed and was the game in town in the first century, he would have never gotten off the ground if he wasn't speaking the language of Son of God and whatnot. It is part of the Roman Empire that you speak that kind of language. If he
yes,
wasn't a son of God, he was a nobody,
yes.
according to this world.
I mean, I was with it wasn't a nasty debate. It was a lovely discussion, and he said, "Well, Son of God means another God. You've created another God." I said, well, "But no, in the Exodus, Israel is called my son. David is called my son. The firstborn son, the son, the beloved son. Those terms in that patriarchal, by all means, world meant the heir. So if you wanted to know the heir apparent, how did you know the heir apparent? You watched who was sitting next to the king on the coins. That was the heir apparent. The queen was on the other side. He'd be on the right. So the heir apparent, the son is the heir apparent. So now it's possible in the first century. That's their language, Dan. It's not my language. If somebody did something magnificent for the world and managed to bring peace to the world and put an end to war, I don't know, we give him the Nobel Prize for Peace. In the first century, we would say, he has revealed the goodness of God. This is God. Now, we would know he could be assassinated. We would understand that that's their language. I give them their language. But very clearly, what I do is when they say Caesar is divine, God, Son of God, Lord, all that language, and they say Jesus, I look at the two of them as if they were running for president of our country, and they're both in New Hampshire in the snows, and I'm listening to their platform. And this is the platform. I will bring you peace after you are subject to me, says Caesar. I will guarantee you the Pax Romana. The only price is you have to be subject to me. And then you have Jesus saying, I will bring you peace. If you want it, you can take it for yourself. I'll tell you how to do it. I'll teach you. So basically, when I listen to those two presidential platforms, I'm for Jesus.
Well, I was just yelling because I heard some noise. So to put it bluntly, just to the answer is that technically, no, Jesus is not synonymous with Yahweh in the identical sense as Trinitarians and whatnot will try to make them one and the same unity, Trinity, of course, which is logically strange when you try to explain it, but it's rather representative of, kind of like the Son is a representation of the divine being God itself. And I wonder if that is the analogy you're trying to paint here, just to make it simple.
It's an analogy. They would push it. They would say the sun brings us light. Okay, so let's skip the sun. We get light some other way. We're not certain that one works. Let's skip the sun and we get light some other way. So they are making a claim that this is the revelation of reality for our world. Now, I take that seriously because it agrees, quite frankly, why I accept the biblical God, despite the personifications, which I don't accept at all, is because I see it tracking exactly like evolution. That's, I no longer know, they're like two lasers where they meet. This is the biblical God, this is evolution. I see them kind of saying the same thing, if you will. And I'm not trying to slip, please, I'm not trying to slip God in when you're not looking. I see the same imperative on our species coming from both those. And I suspect that the biblical tradition is having what I call intuitions of evolution. I mean, they're not, they don't know about evolution. Of course they don't. But they're aware that there seems to be something above us, something that we can't quite beat, that we have to kind of cooperate with, something that looks almost like it has a will and a mind of its own. I don't think evolution does, but it looks awful like it does. So I think religion, all religions, are weak or strong intuitions of evolution. Now, that's where we'd like to start. Then we can ask other questions. And I'm wide open that there might be other questions at that point. But synonymous with Yahweh, if we had somebody today who gave us a complete vision of how we could save the world from climate, I would think he could be my representative of evolution. He would be like the incarnation of evolution. This is how we can get out of the fix we've got in our species. This is how we can avoid the disaster of climate, catastrophe, of destroying enough forests and things. How could we get the world back to habitable again, to sustainable? If somebody incarnated that, as it were, and we do have some people who kind of do incarnate it. In terms of the first century, we call them names we wouldn't use. So I plead with people, understand the language of the first century. I'm Irish. We don't have a prime minister. We have a Taoiseach. Now, if you said to me, you guys stupid people, why don't you call him the prime minister like everyone else? Oh, that's our language. It's Gaelic. It's the Taoiseach. And we don't have a parliament. We have a Dáil, D-A-I-L. That's our language. So obviously you translate it and you say, that's their parliament. That's their prime minister. Okay, I got it. So I'm asking people, put this stuff back in its first century. Say, okay, he's making a claim. Now I get the claim. I reject the claim. Or I get the claim. I accept the claim. So it's hearing a claim, accepting their language, and kind of seeing a bit of way through the language to say, okay, they're making a claim that this person incarnates a certain vision, and we should follow that vision or follow this vision.
Thank you, Dom. Appreciate that. Stephen Burns, why was the Gospel Mark written? Was its author trying to get across a history, or was the intention to update Jewish theology through parables?
Okay, Stephen, all of the above. Here's how I understand Mark. I think it was written not in Rome. I can't believe the Gospel of Mark was written in Rome, and Rome isn't screaming about it, to claim the ascendancy of it, even in its writing. So I think Mark was written in the villages of Caesarea Philippi. That is, it's east of the Jordan, north of the Sea of Galilee, and east of the Sea of Galilee, up in Caesarea Philippi, in that general area. That's why it's interested in Caesarea Philippi, I think. It's written up there. That means it's written in a much more Gentile environment than is, for example, the Q document, which I think was to the southwest inside Galilee. All right. So this is written, that's the place of it. Secondly, it's written in the early 70s when it's inundated, I would say, by refugees from the war in Jerusalem. They've not fled up to Galilee because that's no place to go. That's the way the army came. Over Transjordan and north. He's talking about people who have lost everything. the refugees in plain language. It's a gospel for refugees. And maybe they've lost their faith. That's what chapter 13 was about. They thought in chapter 13, surely now the temple is going up in ruins. Now comes God, Jesus' return. And he has to explain to them, no, Jesus didn't really mean that. Jesus did say in their tradition that he would return, but not now. So he's also very, very critical of Jerusalem-based theology of either the family of Jesus, James, the brother of the Lord, James of Jerusalem, or Peter and the 12. He's almost viciously critical of them. So he's saying, you made the whole mistake by not getting out far more to the Gentiles. Far more to the Gentiles. You should be up here. And it's simply because his own experience is of being Jews, or certainly the Gospel of Mark is written by a Jew, but who is first more attuned not to the diaspora, as it were, the far distance, somewhere in the Anatolian plateau or Greece, but very close to Israel, but in a place with far more Gentiles. Now, was he trying to get across a history? He really is trying to, how would I put it, to redeem their faith. He has to assure them that no, Jesus did not tell you that he would return soon, and that surely then he would have returned as apparently people had said when Jerusalem was falling. Not now, not now. Is he trying to update Jewish theology through parables? Mark doesn't understand at all what parables are. He thinks they're riddles. He honestly, you can see this in chapter 3 and 4. Mark's understanding of parables is this. Jesus told people parables. They didn't get it. No, sorry. Jesus preached to people. Mm-hmm. They didn't get it, or they refused to get it. So to punish them, Jesus went into parables. So you guys won't get it. Then I'll tell my disciples what they mean. And they're not too good in getting it either, but I'll tell them. So parables for Mark, well, look at it. Look at it.
I know. I just did a course with James Tabor on Mark, and I can't wait for people to see it because it's actually validating everything that you're saying about this gospel. But go ahead.
Mark is marvelous. No wonder Matthew and Luke couldn't wait to fix him. And I think if Matthew and Luke were here today and Mark's still in there in the middle, I mean, we got rid of that guy. We swallowed him up. Why is he still around? Mm-hmm. Mark is a terribly radical criticism. But I think for him, the parables are Jesus punishing you by telling you riddles. And then he goes in chapter 4, as you know, he goes into secret and explains the sower, which nobody would have got, I think, really. So, again, you have to read Mark almost as if Matthew and Luke never existed and try and see him himself. And I don't think it makes any sense to have him written in Rome, but it does make sense to have him written among heavy Gentile population. And I would say the gospel for the refugees from Jerusalem, written as most people do most people say it was written in the early 70s, but I don't see it over in Rome at all, even though there is some tradition of that he was the disciple of Peter and Peter went to Rome. So
Thank you. Thank you so much, Stefan, for that super chat. That was a wonderful response. Doc Pluromanaut, good to see you here. Thank you for being a member and a patron, and thank you for the super chat. The scriptures attempt to vindicate God's theodicies by transforming Satan from a trickster cohort to a pure evil antithesis being. How does this demonology evolve given strict monotheism? Makes me think of Zoroastrianism and like the Persian.
Yeah, let me take a late one in Job, and I think it's probably what my Pleuromonaut. I think you must be cruising the Pleuroma. If you look at Job for a moment, the Satan in Job is God in heaven in Job is imagined on the model of the Persian monarch surrounded by all his courtiers. Okay, that's the model. They're personifying. God's not up by himself in heaven and be bored stiff. So God has a court, of course. They can call them the sons and daughters of God, whatever. And among those is a guy called the Satan. That's like a title. It's not a name. It's not Mr. Satan. It's like the vizier or he is the attorney general. His job is to cruise around the earth, the satraps, as it were, of the Persian Empire, come back and report, well, they're doing okay in Mesopotamia, but there's really troubles over there. He is not a trickster yet. He is a spy, maybe, and a dangerous spy, because he might be goading you into doing something so he has some message. He might be the agent provocateur, as it were, who provokes you, who goes up to the satrap, say, in Jerusalem, and asks him, well, don't you get fed up paying your taxes? And if the guy says, yeah, he'll report back, well, so he starts off his life, his history, and this is Elaine Pagels, of course. She's done all of this in the history of Satan already. He starts off really as a spy, attorney general, agent provocateur. And then such he may do some trickster stuff to fool you, to get you to incriminate yourself as somebody, asking you, a police person asking you and saying, oh, no, you're not indicted. No, a suspect. No, I haven't read your Miranda. I was just wondering where you were on the 6th of January last year. And if the person knows exactly where he was on the 6th of January last year, that makes him a suspect. I haven't a clue where I was on the 6th of January last year. I'd have to go looking in date books. And so he starts off like that. Now, I think it is what happens in the history of Judaism is the tipping point, as it were, is the Persian Restoration. Say, round numbers, the 500s. They've had bad empires. They've had the Assyrians who destroyed the north. They have the Babylonians who took them into captivity. Along come the Persians. And the Persians are busy inventing the Marshall Plan. Cyrus, I visited his tomb, Pasargada, years ago. Cyrus has this idea. This is stupid, going out every springtime, looting stuff and coming home. Why don't we set them back up on their feet and make them pay their taxes? Makes much more sense. Saves the army and pays their taxes. So he restores countries to their standard, including Israel. Go back and set yourself up, get your law set up. It's written in the Bible, whatever you call it. I couldn't care less. Just get it set up again. And all of a sudden, everything is great. Now, try and imagine. I'm reading from 2nd Isaiah, as it were. This euphoric, ecstatic moment when we're going home. Financed by the Persians. Cyrus is the Lord's anointed, the Messiah. The world is magnificent. It's changed completely. Empires are good. Now, what do they get? Within 100 plus years, Alexander the Great. And when he dies and his empires break up into warlords, there's about 7 wars in Israel between the death of Alexander in 333, whatever it was, between the North Syria and the South Egypt. They're having all of a sudden, it makes no sense. I think, is God really in charge of this world? I mean, yeah, fine. It looked great. God and the Persians. Oh, yeah, God's in control. He's moving the Persians around. He's changed empires. And then you get Alexander, and he dies, and you get worse than Alexander, because at least he knew what he was doing. You get the pharaohs in Egypt and the Seleucids in Antioch, and they're using our country as a battleground. Saves theirs. There has to be an evil force here. God can't be doing this. Well, there can't be an evil God. So maybe this character, Satan, he is morphing into an evil adversary to God, to whom then you can make up your theodicy. Well, God has given him power just to test us. We're being tested by God. We have to pray. We have to be faithful. We have to wait for God to come and clean up the mess for us. That's the apocalyptic delusion. God's going to do it for us. It is a mess. And clearly it's God's world, so it's God's mess. God's got to clean it up. Isaiah, none of the prophets ever said we're waiting for God to clean up the mess of the world. They never said that. They said it's up to us in covenant with God to clean up the mess. Now, we don't quite know how to handle the Syrians, maybe, but anyway. So I think it is the necessity of, I almost say loss of faith. I'm going to say loss of nerve. Maybe I'm going to say certainly loss of nerve, possibly, probably loss of hope, and possibly even loss of faith that really says we've kind of given up. All we can do is hope and pray and wait for God to come and do it, because this force, this satanic force, is just too big. And somehow we don't understand. God has let it loose in the world. And then they create fallen angels, of course, and all the rest of that to explain it. So right from the very beginning, God had the good angels. And then one of the angels was proud and fell. Now, that just postpones the question. If God created angels, why weren't they all good? So you keep, honest to God, it sounds to me like, remember under Nixon and Watergate, we kept trying to not have the guilt get on to Nixon.
Right.
Could it be here? But again, it gets to the White House, not to the White House, but not to the president. The great apocalyptic myth is not how do we answer it without saying, well, God's doing it. God's just got a nasty sense of humor. So Satan is becoming more and more powerful. And then, of course, you have to explain it. As our faith isn't strong enough, our prayers aren't strong enough. We're waiting for God to do it. And the huge delusion is that God is ever going to do it, even apart from personifications or anything else. So I understand it as what you can see happening if you want to look at the book of Daniel and the first 6 chapters. They are young aristocrats in Babylon, and they have no problem. They're given this problem by the emperor, and they pray to God, and off they go and solve it. They're put into a den of lions, and God takes care of them. They're put into the fiery furnace, and it's them and God, and they're working fine. There ain't no angels coming down to explain stuff. Then you get to the second half. All of a sudden, Daniel doesn't know anything. He can't explain anything. It needs an angel to appear to him and tell him what's going on. This was Daniel, who was able to take on, Nebuchadnezzar and explain his dream. All of a sudden, he's lost it. Please read the 2 halves of Daniel and watch, because it's the pivot point where you can see almost certainly loss of nerve. You can't figure out that we and God can figure this out, even leaving the biblical God now and all the rest of it. We can't figure out what God is up to. There has to be another force. So I think that's the historical background for it for me.
Okay, I'm going to try and blast through because I don't want you to be miserable. No. I love this. Every single thing you're saying is fun. I really enjoy this, Dom. So I just want you to know, because I don't want you to hate me because I let you go. I think it's a curse and a blessing at the same time for me, because I'm like, yes, I get to not interrupt you and learn. At the same time, it's a curse because it's like, okay, hold on, how much time? And then Dom's like, I gotta go soon, and I don't want to leave you hanging too long.
I'm in Florida. I have no watch on.
It is. I just don't want you to be like, it's that guy, Derek.
The questions are very, very good. And I know I'm talking lengthily. I'm sorry.
No, I don't want you to apologize at all. I just don't want you thinking that guy, Derek, and I want you to be comfortable. So Gray's 174, do you have any unique thoughts, interactions with the whole Daniel is a Maccabean forgery thing? I would probably need to ask John Collins on this, because this is his specific.
My friend John would know far more. Let me put it this way: anything I know about Daniel or the Maccabees, I learned from John, who was my colleague at DePaul for a while. I don't think so. I don't think Daniel is sympathetic to the Maccabees. I think Daniel comes from scribal circles, for whom the Maccabean solution, which is go beat the Syrians, which they did. It is a solution. They won. They didn't see it, and I don't think Second Maccabees especially would be impressed by it. I think the big thing is I don't see it actually, because Daniel, the 2 halves of it, the two halves of it, it almost splits, and the split isn't synonymous with the Jewish and the Aramaic and the what am I
Yeah,
talking
the
about?
earlier materials kind of
Yeah,
has an Aramaic, Hebrew Aramaic,
yeah.
if you will,
There's
mix.
a split that's not coincident with 1 to 6, because the first one I think is Jewish. The first chapter I think is, as far as I remember, is Hebrew rather than Aramaic. Anyway,
Mhm.
I don't think it works, honestly. I think, especially if you look at what Daniel is about, I think he's not the least. And I think John Collins would agree with me on this. I'm pretty certain. It's written by sages, and the Maccabees are, of course, soldiers, warriors. And there's two different solutions. And the solution of the Maccabees is freedom. We get freedom. Now, to be very fair, it's like the time of David. The Romans haven't come. Your freedom is short lived. Yeah. Right now, the great empires, the pharaohs of Egypt and the Seleucids of Syria, their days are now numbered, because the Romans are coming. And when the Romans come, they don't go back. When the Romans come east, they're not going back. But by the time they hit the Euphrates, they're staying. So, in one sense, Daniel is right. The future is not with the warriors. The future is with the sages. And that's why that's a short history of Judaism in the 1st century and the 2nd century. The future is not with the warriors against Rome. It's with the sages against Rome.
Grays is back again with another one. How often do you think about hell, and how often do you fear it? And what changed your thoughts about hell if you previously did, but now don't fear it?
Um, to
Great
be
question.
Yeah, for centuries, centuries, what am I talking about? For decades, I was pretty clear that heaven and hell were not places in the future, but options in the present. But what I'm much more impressed now is by, when you look at Paul, Paul the Pharisee, and Paul the Pharisees believed that at the end of time there's going to be a great big cosmic judgment. Everyone will raise from the dead. God will judge them all, and they'll all go off to heaven or hell. Now, I don't believe a word of that, but I do. I'm not going to say believe, because I accept. I accept that as a species, I'm going to be redundant again. As a species, we are running an option on heaven and hell on ourselves. And yes, there is such a thing as a great cosmic judgment. And it's not run by God, it's run by evolution. And if we stop tracking with evolution and don't stop tracking against evolution, we, the human species, will issue finally a great final judgment on ourselves. And that includes everyone who's ever lived. Everyone who's done the tiniest little thing in the times when nobody was even worrying about polluting the rivers or anything else. But that is a judgment on our species. You could say, I didn't do it, you didn't do it, Derek didn't do it. But our species can make the earth uninhabitable. And we're working hard at it. That means I see heaven and hell as options in the present, racing one another, and we're making a choice every day in every different way, in tiny little ways. And some of them I almost can't see. I don't see how not to do that.
So,
That's the
Dom, if I can I press you here? I just want to get more specific on something that I think is interesting in this question. You were in the monastery for 19 years as a monk. Was there a time in your history of your past where you believed hell was a post after you die place you go? And I mean, obviously, you've learned a lot over time. Maybe your great learning has driven you mad, as they said to Paul. But has your great learning led you out of recognizing hell as a mythological, if you think of it in the post-mortem sense, it's a mythological invention to control people. Did you have a time where you really believed it as a real burning place for eternal hellfire, all of that? And then what was it that did it for you that maybe saw you other, like the way you're looking at it now?
I grew up in Ireland. Okay. I grew up where Roman Catholicism was a wallpaper of the country. It didn't have to be pressed. I'm in the South. I'm talking about the Republic of Ireland, obviously. Everyone was Catholic. It was taken for granted. So this was just something you were told. I never remember it. I'm sorry to tell you the truth. Thinking, "Ooh, ooh." I just didn't. I mean, it was something you were told or whatever. It was like, if you do this, you might get mumps or something. I never remember it the same way as when I came to this country and realized that there was fundamentalists in every country, in every little town, and you were hearing about this all the time. And I, I I never remember being that terrified about it. To be honest, it was just like the paraphernalia of life. Like they might tell you there could be a catastrophe of one way or the other. So, but I kind of from the very beginning, Roman Catholicism invented purgatory. So we've heaven and hell. Now we have purgatory. And that's a kind of an in-between state that you can get out of. So it's like, in between. And then there's a whole production to get you out of purgatory, all that involves money. So purgatory, as soon as I began to be aware of it, I'm now talking probably when you start thinking. I mean, but then you're teenagers when you start thinking about it. But I was too involved in, other stuff, trying to learn Latin and Greek and everything in high school. We nobody bothered about it. We didn't have the sort of, I'm trying to think of the sermons that you got in high school in James Joyce in Clongerswood College. He tells a sermon about, hellfire waiting for you. I think we probably got those too. And they probably convinced us not to take it seriously. Honestly, because I'm really trying to think back. I read James Joyce probably, when I was maybe a teenager, and he went to a different high school, a boarding school too. And he tells about a retreat master there who gave them a hell. I'm sure we must have had it too. We must have had it. And I think it went right over my head.
Well, just in case anybody's in fear, we do sell indulgences here at MythVision. All you got to do is join the Patreon or become a member.
And if you read, I shouldn't mock it, but if you read Render to Caesar, there's an automatic plenary indulgence.
Exactly. Well, I see I wanted to give them, if you buy the book Render unto Caesar, you literally will have coins created for you in the afterlife, and they will have your name and image on it. So just keep that in mind. You might want to consider becoming a purchaser of the book. You will also have wings. Next super chat. Doc Ploromanot, thank you again, Doc, for the super chat. Speculate on teens Jesus James potential influence by the whispering memories of Judas the Galilean, fourth Philo, as they were likely exposed to remnant sophistae during the rebuilding of Zippori as hired tectons.
Okay. Tecton is the word that let me put it, that Mark uses to explain who Jesus was. I think the proper translation would be, to give us the right impression and not to offend anyone, a day worker. And I use day worker to mean that if you get work every day, you're in good shape. But a day worker means you have to go looking for work every day. That's what I mean by a day worker. So you're never sure. If you're a day worker and you're going to get, 6 days a week, a denarius for 6 days a week for a year, you're doing really good. Take out 50, what's that, about 300 denarius. Oh, you'd be doing really good to get 300 denarius for a year. So a tecton is a day worker. That's my translation. All right. Here's what I want to ask you to imagine. What was it? Let me make sure that I get it right. In 4 BCE, at the death of Herod the Great, there was revolt all over the Jewish homeland. It was almost like a pressure cooker. Boom! There wasn't a coordinated rebellion centered in Jerusalem. There was rebellions all over the country. The Romans, as usual, sent legions who were stationed near Antioch in Syria, Antioch on the Orontes. They sent them south along the coast. They do their staging area at Ptolemais, and they sent one squadron in to burn Sepphoris to the ground, according to Josephus. Now, they've never found the lair, but to burn it to the ground. The legions marched on legions march on their stomachs. When they leave base, they have 3 days supplies. After that, they live off the land. Now, they live off the land. They may loot Sepphoris, but it's the villages round about that have the animals and everything else. So there's no way that Sepphoris was attacked in 4 BCE and Nazareth was untouched. And what you hope for is all those hiding places that we found all over Galilee, that they would have fled and hid out. But Nazareth would have been flattened to the ground. Now, here's my question. I'm trying to imagine a day when Jesus is a teen, let's say even preteen, give him 10 or 11, when Mary takes him up to the Nazareth Ridge, and you can see Sepphoris way off there in the distance, high on its hill, you can see it. And she tells him about the day the Romans came. I grew up in Ireland. We were still singing songs about the day the French didn't come to aid us in 1798. We're still, that's how, most of my Irish history I know. I know some songs of rebellion, not from the courses that I passed and forgot. So I consider that it's impossible for Jesus growing up in Nazareth, not that the main subject in the village during his formative years was the day the Romans came and went past us, destroyed Sepphoris, destroyed all the villages round about, and passed south like I was going to say a herd of locusts. I don't care, they're a swarm of locusts, leaving the land denuded, burned, raped, enslaved, looted. You can't not. That had to be the subject. It was the biggest thing ever happened in their life. So that happens 4 BCE, Jesus, the family. Now the big question might be, was Joseph, the father of Jesus, could he have been trapped in Sepphoris? Because you don't hear of Joseph. It talks about Mary as the mother. Where is Joseph? Now I'm guessing, I'm filling in if I was writing a novel or something. I think Joseph may have been killed in the Roman sweep, however you put it. And that Jesus and Mary and that family grew up. And I think, by the way, that James was probably the eldest son. Jesus, the youngest. That they grew up with the memory of the Romans, not, those weirdos way over there in Italy beyond the sea, as people who were in their backyard, looting, raping, killing, enslaving, around the time you were born, Jesus. I don't have to, to imagine, but I can't imagine. Right. No, let me put it that way. Now, do they know about other stuff that happened in Jerusalem? Because the example you were there, Judas the Galilean, of course, right. You're really talking about what happened in 6 CE. And he's called Judas the Galilean because he's not happening in Galilee. If he's in Galilee, they don't say, where's Judas the Galilean? He's called Judas the Galilean because they're talking about him in Jerusalem, in Judea. So he is 10 years later, at the time of the census in 6 CE. And that's when, for the first time, in my understanding, and Josephus tells us all about this, Jewish sages experiment with nonviolent resistance. No, I mean nonviolent resistance. I don't mean nonviolence. That's the Romans love that. Nonviolent resistance. I think it started with Judas the Galilean at the time of the census. That's why you notice that in 6 CE, the legions don't have to march. Armed rebellion comes the legions. No armed rebellion, but any sort of a disorder that can be taken care of by local police force.
Wow, that was a lot in my imagination. Really,
sorry, it was an awful lot, but the question was an awful good one. And
that was a really good. It paints a picture in your head to imagine, like what was going on. Great question, Doc. And you need to get. I'm not just saying this. Get the book here because he is actually piecing a lot of these kind of things together in a way. And then also like the coin, like this is a real coin from around this time, and And the issue brought up, even in the Gospels, though it seems a little bit narrated, this seems to be a real issue that Jews would have wrestled with. And sure, there was a debate there. So something to consider. Get the book. I don't want to get lost there. But Stephen Burns, thank you for the super chat again. I know the early gospel writers were highly educated. Would they have read Plato and other Greek philosophers? If so, what was their influence?
And I know some of the debates behind this. When you have friends who we had on, highly educated. Okay. That's a terribly tricky time. I mean, honestly, I can't imagine a snob like Tacitus picking up anything in the New Testament and not saying, "Oh my." No, I mean, they would not. But I grew up in Donegal. I was actually highly educated because I went to a classical boarding school. And the reason we had a classical boarding school in the wilds of Donegal, look up Letterkenny if you want to find it, Letterkenny in Donegal, which is way off the beaten track, was because I was the first generation with the British gone, but they had left our education system behind. So, of course, we had 5 years of Greek and 5 years of Latin, which the British had invented to teach their elites how to run an empire. By the way, they should have taught them that what Greece and Rome tells you is how to lose an empire. That's another question. Anyway, I was highly educated. Doesn't make me particularly smart or anyone else, but I suppose you could call that highly educated. I mean, I read Homer, I read Demosthenes, we started with Caesar's Gallic War. We were smart asses. The opening words of Caesar Gallic War is omnis Gallia in tres partes divisa est. And we were smart asses enough, not in class, to translate that as Caesar divided every Gaul he met into 3 parts. Well, we were capable of making a joke about all Gaul is divided into 3 geographical parts, So
yeah, and Caesar would have.
I honestly don't think so. In that world, if you're able to read and write, if you're able to write, I'm going to say the crudest Greek in the New Testament, if you're able to write that, now you might well be able to speak to a secretary. I think there could be educated Romans who I have a suspicion who couldn't write the Greek they wrote. They were speaking to a secretary. I don't know that. So we have to understand that. Would they have read Plato and other Greek? I'm going to say no. I don't think Paul would have read Plato and other Greek philosophers. I think you can pick up, somebody doesn't have to read Hamlet to know the lady doth protest too much, or to say methinks you doth protest too much. They can have picked it out of the air. It's around, maybe they're real smart and they know it was Gertrude. Maybe they know it was the play within the play. That's highly educated. That means you know Shakespeare. But you could pick that up, or you could pick up the id and the ego. We pick up stuff from the atmosphere. So I don't know if Dennis MacDonald would argue more that they had actually read this, and maybe. But the writing, I think you would have to admit, it would not be up to the standards of Josephus, if he's even up to his own standards. So I really want to think about highly educated, because
maybe Luke, Acts, and Hebrews, but you start getting off into and immediately after, and you're like, this.
That would drive some. When I'm quoting those, I always take the ands out and start the sentence in, when I put it into English. But I mean, I want the point to be clear. Go back. I grew up in Donegal. In the boarding school, I had many colleagues, kids, whose parents, some of them might have been bilingually illiterate. bilingually illiterate.
Mm-hmm.
They were illiterate, but could speak Gaelic fluently and could speak English fluently enough. And if somebody could write them down, had very good stories to tell, because the Scandinavians kept coming over with their what do you call them, recorders. And I sometimes imagine in the pubs of Donegal in the winter, the guy saying, let's create another myth for the Scandinavians. They'll be back soon and they want to know another story. You got any good ones to invent? Oh yeah, I got this one about Finn McCool I just made up last night. That's a good one. Let's feed that to them. They'll record it and tell them it's, they're educated people. They're highly intelligent.
Mm.
So I am very careful with people who've grown up in an oral tradition, who might be every bit as smart as I am, even if they can't read and write. So I got into a lot of trouble by saying Jesus was illiterate, because everyone thought that meant I was saying he was dumb. But Jesus would probably have said, before the Gospels, something like, most of the people I know who can read and write aren't very nice people. They're the problems. They're the people who are giving us all the trouble, who are running the retinue of the tax people. I'm not sure the people who read and write are that on our side. So I don't want to get into an argument with somebody that maybe they knew something, because maybe they did.
Right.
I was thinking last week, I was talking about with Neil on
Gnostic informant.
Neil, a Gnostic informant. And we were talking about, the three women at the end of Mark's Gospel who are mourning the death of Jesus, and the three women at the end of Homer's Iliad who are kind of mourning, but also accusing Hector of having died and left them there to be enslaved and everything else. And I'm wondering, in light of his comments, if somebody was reading Mark with a Roman background, would he immediately think of these three women and those three women? Or would he, if he was reminded of it, think, oh, that is really from the sublime to the ridiculous. These three women mourning Hector, the great one killed by Achilles and all the rest of it, the great Trojan hero. And now you have this Jesus. I'm not sure that elites of Rome would be impressed by the elites of the New Testament, if we put it that way.
Right. I do think it's interesting how Hector is the hero of the city, and when he dies, the city is destroyed. He's dragged for 3 days behind the chariot, and his body's still intact. And then, of course, his father goes by night and says to Achilles, please let me give him a proper burial. I wonder if, like you said, whether they're looking at the text or whether it's in the air and they know these stories like the back of their hand. Either way, I do think that there's some impression, no matter what, that is going on, whether it's literary, like Dennis says, or like others are seeing. They know of the trope, they know of the narrative, and they want to create an epic. I like to call it an epic epic tragedy for Jesus. So that's what I think is going on. But
I'm much more inclined to say that the ordinary person, let's say, who is illiterate, can't read or write, would know those stories, would know the stories. What else do? They don't have television. They don't have Netflix or Prime or Hulu or anyone else. So those are their entertainment, those stories. They know the biblical stories. I don't think Jesus could read Torah, but I not the slightest doubt he knows about David and Goliath. And that's enough.
Exactly. Or Moses, or
Moses, of course.
Yeah,
those are great stories. How could you not know them?
Shoot, I love them, even though I don't believe them to be true. Gray's 174. Any thoughts on the Necromancer theft hypothesis? And I actually recently interviewed Del C. Allison Jr. And I said, Del, you told me in your book, your latest book, you have 4 different Dells that exist. I want you to put on the skeptical hat and imagine that there was an empty tomb. Okay, because I know you don't buy into the empty tomb narrative, and that's a whole different discussion. Maybe we can have deeper later on. But he said, when I said, give me what you think if there was an empty tomb, because he does think there was an empty tomb, but either way, if there is an empty tomb and you're a skeptic, what best explains the missing body? And of course, he thinks with all of these stones that there's inscriptions that are saying Quit stealing the bodies of the dead.
Right.
And there's the death penalty for people who do.
There is.
He thought maybe magicians or some type of necromancers stole the body of a noble man like Jesus. And you can't imagine what they would have done with this body in their magical practices. But either way, what are your thoughts about that? You think it has any credibility if there was an empty tomb?
No, that's me. Look, if you take the story as is, it's easy enough to explain it. They hit the wrong tomb. That's the easy thing. They hit an empty tomb that was ready to have somebody in it. Here's what I do, just so I know. I don't make this up. I look at Mark, copied into Matthew and Luke, and I think copied into John. As I look across that scenario, I watch the tomb getting better and better and better. In Mark, they just barely have time to wrap him up. Okay? By the time you get to John, he has not just an imperial burial, he's a divine burial. The tomb is so filled with stuff you can hardly, and it's in a garden, it's perfect. I try to project that back and say, what do they actually know about the tomb of Jesus? Do I start with Mark? I think they knew nothing about the tomb. They didn't know what happened to Jesus. I think they had fled, including the women. And their only hope, and I'm with them on the hope, that surely some pious Jew, not one of ours, but some pious Jew like Tobit, in the book of Tobit, who knew it was right to bury the dead, buried Jesus. Surely somebody did it. Now, I think what Mark is trying to do is end his story without a vision, because otherwise it's going to be a vision of Jesus, the Peter or the 12 or something like that. He wants to end it with a dark scenario. They found the tomb. Jesus wasn't there, but they will see him again in Galilee. And I don't think he's talking about a vision. He's talking about get out of Jerusalem. You should have done years ago. I think Mark ends to avoid the visions, which were probably there already. And he ends with an empty tomb. Now, anyone in the Roman world who reads a story about finding an empty tomb has two alternatives. One is these people are lies, or they're mistaken, or it's the wrong tomb or anything. They either say, because this is in the novels, somebody stole the body, and nobody would do it except, well, they could say, well, the Pharisees stole the body because they didn't want a tomb veneration or something. I mean, you could do it with some kind of, theft of the body. Or these people are claiming with this story that this Jesus has ascended among the gods. If I'm a Roman, I'm open-minded. I have nothing against this story. I'm just reading it. And I read it. I get finding an empty tomb. I might say, I wonder, did they get the wrong tomb? Well, no, they should know what they're doing because it says they saw where he was buried. So, okay, they must have got the right tomb. Either somebody stole it. I'm just now an open-minded Roman, not prejudiced. Quite open to people going up to heaven because I know what happens all the time. Emperors do it and Romulus did it. And so, okay, sure, it can happen, I guess. Then maybe this Jesus is important enough, whoever he is, to be taken up among the gods. Those are my options. And that's what Mark intends, because he knows for his people, they will understand it as meaning. And here's where we have to be very careful. Does he intend it to mean ascension or resurrection? So there's far more. Let me put this. The huge problem of Easter Sunday morning, if I took it absolutely as is, go to the tomb, got to the tomb of Jesus, found it empty, visions and all the rest, is why they don't interpret that as simply ascension. God has taken Jesus up to heaven like Moses and Josephus and Philo. Why isn't God took Jesus up to heaven? Why would they ever come up with this weird Pharisaic idea of resurrection? Where on earth did that come from? And then I'd push it and say, was it ever there before Paul? Because in the gospel, according to Q, good old Q document, there ain't no resurrection mentioned in there. It's not there. And it's not that it's omitted. It's not there in the theology. So we have a huge question that we're the elephant in the tomb, if you will, the elephant in the room. What's the difference between ascension and resurrection? Ascension is a multi-level cultural thing. The Romans believed in it. The Jews believed in it. Everyone in the ancient world believed a person could be taken up among the gods or God, like Elijah, say, or the Pharisaic idea, which was an intra-Jewish sectarian belief in cosmic justice. They're totally different visions. So I would want to talk about that. Why didn't it come up with ascension anyway?
Thank you, Dom. All right, I'm gonna push you through here. No more super chats after this last one that we just had, unless you're wanting to just show love to the channel, because I don't want to get caught up on questions. I got to let Dom go at some point here. Grays 174. Do you agree more on literal truth claims with Robert Price or William Lane Craig? And who do you agree with more on metaphorical truth claims?
Oh, to be honest with you, Gray, I've never compared the two. I've debated with William Lane Craig. I don't think I've ever debated with Robert Price. So I'm not too clear on them. What I would say to both of them, because people have said it to me, oh, you just think resurrection is a metaphor. Yeah, I do. Metaphors create reality when they're lived. This is a philosophical position. Metaphors create reality. Metaphor is seeing as. You see this as that. Clouds sail across the sky, so you see the sky as the sea. You got that. Supposing we were to see the world and its future in terms of resurrection, that Jesus rose from the dead and everything else. Now, I said at the beginning how I would take it, that there is a cosmic justice and that we can't get away from it, that there is accounts due for what we have done. No, they don't come from God, and no, they don't come from a last judgment by God. So I take metaphors seriously because I don't believe we've anything else to imagine. Democracy is a metaphor. It's a way of seeing the world. Will it work? Well, we think it has worked pretty well for us for 250 years, whatever it is. Now we're beginning to see maybe there are ways you can beat democracy. Maybe it delves into plutocracy or something else. So maybe it's not a guaranteed way. So, but that's a way of seeing it. In the 1930s, we had two visions of the future: the Third Reich and the New Deal. Now, they were both visions of the future. In 1935, it was touch and go. Which one? 36, 37. They were both visions of the future, and people tried to live them. We know what happened. That doesn't make one of them not a metaphor. It's a metaphor apparently that worked, and the other was a metaphor that didn't. And a metaphor that doesn't work is called a catastrophe, if we're talking about reality. So metaphor for me is the ground of truth. So when I say resurrection is a metaphor, I'm not saying, oh, it's just like, one of those things the poet does when you say, my love is like a red, red rose, ha, 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 No, it is the ground of reality. It's not entertainment for poets. So please take metaphor seriously. The literal stuff is just the facts. The interpretation of it is done by metaphor. That's why people differ. They may agree on the fact. They may agree that Jesus did live, did talk about God's rule, was executed. They might agree with all of that. Then you still have to say, yeah, but are you with Pilate for killing a rabble-rouser, which he saw him, creating tumult among the people would have been Pilate's indictment? Or do you think his vision was right for the future of the human race? That's what a metaphor is asking you. Look at this, and if you lived it out, do you think it would work or not? So I consider resurrection a metaphor. I consider almost anything in the Bible which is of long-living, permanent value a metaphor. So if Jesus was born in Nazareth and we say Jesus was born in Bethlehem, let's say, metaphorically, that is saying he is like the new David, but he's not David the warrior. He's David the non-violent reformer. Ooh, that's a powerful claim. Whether he was where he was born is interesting. It's not going to shake the world. It's just a kind of a fact. But if you move him from Nazareth, where I think he was born, of course, of Mary and Joseph, move him to Bethlehem of Mary and God, you're making a gigantic claim about the meaning of the universe. I'm listening very carefully to claims about the meaning of the universe because I think we could do with a few of them. I think they were bigger.
Appreciate that. Sovereign Soul, thank you for that super chat, my friend. Your interpretation of the mark of the beast was one of rebuking the Roman economic system. At what point did Christianity abandon this understanding, and what did they replace it with?
Constantine. What do you do when the empire joins you? What do you do when the empire joins you? When the empire is smart enough to give in and co-opt you. I was once giving a lecture in Havana, in Cuba, and we were talking about this very point, this sort of question. And I said, maybe in the next decades, you people will have to go through this. What are you going to do when the empire joins you? And I was talking about America, of course, when instead of being your enemy, it floods you with money. Then we'll see who co-opts who. I think what was going on is let me back. Rome had two problems. Always the Roman Empire. It could never work out succession. It had always a problem. Who's next? If we say who's next, he might take over now. If I say it's my son, then my son might be an idiot. So they had a huge problem with succession and a huge problem with their borders. Those were their two things. So they had experimented with having two Augustuses and two Caesars in the 200s. And now, along comes Constantine. He wants one empire, one emperor, me, one new imperial city, Constantinople, of course. And he looks around and says, but there has to be one religion. This makes no sense that there's all these gods all over the place. They're all lovely, but it doesn't work. Now, he had two options, to be honest with you. And let's say it loud and clearly, he had two options, even in the 320s. Judaism had been around for a very long time. Granted, most Romans thought they were weirdos, but they were ancient weirdos. Now there were Christians. They were new weirdos. So, okay, if you're a balance of weirdos, who do we go with? The Roman instinct, I think, would have been to go with Judaism. Now, obviously, the males are not all going to get circumcised. Of course not. Of course not. Constantine's not going to get circumcised. That could be negotiated. Of course it could be negotiated. So when he looks around and he sees Christianity, but Christianity is already Romanized.
Mm-hmm.
The Jews...
Luke, Acts, you go into this in your book.
Thank God the Jews ain't Romanized. They've figured out after 200 years of fighting the Romans, back off into your own home. We'll create sanctity in the home and in the synagogue. We let the world do its evil. We won't take on the world again. So they're not properly Romanized. He looks at Christianity. Perfect. No, I'm really not. This is sincere, absolutely sincere within his mind. It's so obvious. Of course, they have been converging slowly on us for 300 years. Christianity is the religion of the Roman Empire. But that means it's of the Roman Empire, like the navy of the Roman Empire and the army of the Roman Empire. And they belong to us. Now, of course, I'll build their churches and I'll court, but just, be very careful who's in charge here. You guys got the angels in heaven and Jesus, who's Son of God, and I'm down here on earth with the legions. And I still have a halo, by the way. And so let's be very careful about who's in charge of the earth. And then I'll build you your churches and everything will be lovely. That's the deal of the 4th century. Christianity, and I'm not at all saying if I was there, I would know better. I might have been like Eusebius. I might have said, isn't this the kingdom of God on earth when I go into the banquet hall of Constantine? I could. You can be co-opted. especially if you think it's good for your faith and your religion.
Yeah, it wasn't one. This is why your book's so good. Christianity wasn't like one message. It was the wild, wild west, even in the 2nd century. But there's so many things to consider. Luke Acts played a very significant role in this co-opting and what's going on here. So I've got 5 more super chats I want to get to before I let you go, Dom. But get the book, Render Unto Caesar. He goes into this, and it's amazing. You can get it on Audible, too. You can listen to it.
I think if you don't know Luke Acts, you can't understand Constantine. It's the first step towards Constantine. Okay.
And it's well before Constantine. So Abel Chavez says, is the Torah an inversion of astrotheology, or the image of God could mean the zodiac attributes incarnated in each of us, perhaps? Mankind had to get something right. What do you believe is the closest to the truth? Choose. Thank you for the super chat, Abel.
Astrotheology. The image of God could mean the zodiac. I think I would let you, Abel, try and work that out yourself. For me, and you could consider it prejudice if you want, the vision that I get of the biblical God, at the best of the biblical God, that's the God, say, of Genesis 1, to be very clear, the God who's shown as the overture to the Bible, to whom we're supposed to read the whole Bible, who creates man and woman and puts them in charge of the universe to keep it in justice. I think that's as close as I can get to something tracking with evolution for me. But I'd ask every religion the same question. How does your religion help track me with evolution? Because I can't not accept, I'm not saying believe in evolution. So the zodiac, I'd want to know much more about what it meant. I mean, there is the zodiac on those floors, as you well know, of the synagogue. So obviously they could see the zodiac, the control of the universe. I mean, is that sort of what I would call an intuition of evolution? The astrotheology. If you look up at the stars and begin to recognize, as people did, of course, that there's a pattern up there, and they keep coming up, and they keep coming up, and they keep coming up. There's something going on there. Somebody is running the show. I could see exactly the time when you could see a star-studded sky that you figured somebody is running a show up there, and maybe they're like cars on a freeway or something. I think honestly, those are intuitions of something in charge of us for good or evil. And I would say, again, I'm repeating myself, whether you think that's God or not, it is in media, in medias res, is evolution. And the zodiac could be an intimation of it.
Thank you so much, Abel. And inquisitive mind, if there was a court for the Gentiles, then where does Mecca come into this for the Arabs? As surely, and mind you, I think he's trying to come at this from Islam, as surely the Arabs wouldn't go to places for pilgrimage. So the point is there's the claim that in the 7th century, Muslims were actually...
Oh, I'm sorry. You didn't say that in your question. You said, would Arabs go to the temple? You didn't say in the 7th century. Of course. I was talking about the 1st century. I don't do the 7th century. Okay, sorry. I'm sorry. No,
I believe that's what's going on, because there's like this enduring claim in Islam specifically, not every Muslim probably thinks this way, but that they are taking a pilgrimage to the place which Abraham also did, which was in Arabia, it seems, where Mecca is. So there's like a later claim by Muslims that it's, rather than Jerusalem.
Right. Well, wait a minute. I mean, certainly the Dome of the Rock, the dome inside, the rock inside the Dome of the Rock, which is on the esplanade of the temple, up there on the top, was the place from which Mecca did the night ride to heaven and returned. Not his
Muhammad.
Like, who did I say?
Mecca. You said Mecca.
I'm sorry. Excuse me.
Yeah, I get it. It's
Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. He had ascended into heaven. So I could really imagine today a pious Muslim who would want to go to Mecca, but would also on the way there or on the way back want to stop in Jerusalem and see the Dome of the Rock. I don't know, when I was there in a different world in 65, I could walk inside inside the Dome of the Rock. I don't know. I have no idea at the moment. Can anyone go in? I don't know. But they might want to go there, or the mosque, which is on the southern end. A pious Muslim, Arab or not, I don't know whether he's an Arab or he could be an Indonesian, a pious or American, a pious Muslim could want to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem and visit the Dome of the Rock, or what is what's it called? There's a name on that mosque. The mosque which is on top of the esplanade of the temple. There's a mosque there as well.
I thought that was Dome of the Dome. Oh, no. That is something different than the Dome of
the
the Rock. I can't remember the name.
The Dome of the Rock was built to be slightly higher than the dome of the Church of the Sepulchre, by the way. Just a teeny bit higher. Because when the Muslims took Christians took over Jerusalem and built it slightly higher than anything else. And then I shouldn't say the Arabs, the Muslims came and did the same. Yeah, I think they could want to. Is it the mosque? I'm sorry, I must be getting old. The Mosque of Omar. But anyway, I think it is absolutely possible for a Muslim today to want to visit Jerusalem and to be on top of the temple, not down at the Wailing Wall, not they were on top of the temple if they could. I want to visit both the Dome of the Rock, if they could, and enter it if they could, and also the mosque, which is there as well, on top of it. Muslims, as far as I know now, I haven't been in Jerusalem since 2000, and I don't know when. But anyway, I wasn't up on top of the temple. I'm not looking for trouble. As far as I know, I was there on a Friday, and I could see streams of Muslims coming towards the temple. I was trying to mind my own business, so I wasn't getting too close, but they were coming towards the temple. I presume they were going up on top of the esplanade to that mosque. So they were walking, whether they like it or not, then through the court of the Gentiles, because that's what's there. The Dome of the Rock is kind of more or less on the center of where the Holy of Holies was, I think around that. But to get down to the south, they'd have to go walk through it. So I don't know, but I would say yes, as far as I know, today a Muslim could go up on top of the temple unless the Israelis are having securities or something like that. But physically, yes, they could. And in terms of holiness, they would want to be there. I think Jerusalem, now again, if I'm wrong, is the second holiest place after the Mecca and Medina.
Thank you. MJT532, did Antiochus destroy city and sanctuary? Daniel 9:26.
Oh, I don't think he was interested in destroying it in the physical sense of demolishing it. What he wanted to do was turn it into a pagan temple. And in that sense, of course, he desecrated it. So if you're using the term desecration as the most profound destruction you can think of, much better than blowing it up or tearing it apart, yes, he did. Because what he did was he turned it into the abomination of desolation by making it a pagan temple. And Antiochus IV Epiphanes from Syria. You're talking about 165 in round numbers BCE.
Thank you for that super chat. Sages and Pages, thank you for the super chat. Do you think postmodernism has relaxed the standards of historical inquiry? If yes, examples.
It hasn't for me. I remember Tom Wright years ago saying I was a postmodern and I just wanted to scream. I've read postmodernism. I think that the silliest statement a human being could ever make is there is no truth. When you hear that, you can hear logic giggling in the background. Because if you say there is no truth, then that's not true. Language won't let you mix really postmodern statements. If by postmodernism you mean that when you're reading anything, you should ask yourself, what is this communicator up to? What is the purpose of this, what I'm reading? Is it pure entertainment? Is it just fiction? And if it's just fiction, how come, for example, it's always the white people who have the black servants? Is that just innocent fiction, just telling you a story? Or is A postmodernist, I'll ask a question. How come in all of your fictional writings, the hero is always a male white person? That's a postmodern question. Before you say, well, the great cowboys, or the great detective stories, and it's always I never noticed, you might say, it's always a white male. There ain't any females, and there's certainly no colored people or Orientals or anything. They're always, So postmodernism asks that question. It's asked the question of design. So you ask, why? Why would you say that? So that's a postmodern question, and it's a fair question to ask of anyone. And, it's a fair question if somebody say to me, why do you say God and he? I will never say God. I would simply repeat the word God. And I use English to avoid, presumably, if I can think of it, to see it coming. So postmodernism can be destructive of human intercourse because you're so busy figuring out what this person is saying that I've forgotten what the person said. But yeah, you have to ask when you watch an advertisement. We know this. If it tells you this is the greatest restaurant the world has ever known, that's enthusiasm. You don't call it a lie. If you say there's 500 people there every night, that might be a lie. But if you say, I gave the greatest speech the world has ever known, that's enthusiasm. If you said there was 50,000 people there to hear me, that's a lie, if there wasn't. So yeah, I do believe there is truth. I don't believe there's my truth. There's my opinion. There's my argument. There's my evidence. All of that you can say, I don't agree with your evidence. You've forgotten this. Fair enough. But there is such a thing as truth. And I don't like that we've got to the point of saying kind of everyone has their own truth. No, everyone has a right to their own opinion. And your opinion without evidence is like playing basketball without a hoop. It's not much fun. But we're all equally good at it, or playing tennis without a net. We're kind of all Serena Williams if there's no net. We might never be able to hit anything back, but nobody wins. So evidence is important for me too.
Thank you, Dom. Last one here is Jason Stewart. Jesus is often called a failed prophet about the soon to come end of the world. Looking at Paul about the end to come, 1 John, James, is it historical?
Almost everyone in the New Testament thought the end of the world was coming soon. That came out of apocalypticism, when he couldn't sustain the world anymore. There is a real argument about Jesus, honestly, a real argument. I have trouble with it because it depends what you're going to say. If, for example, Mark 9:1, if Jesus said, there's some standing here who will not taste death before they see the Son of God coming in power, whatever that one is. If he said that, then yeah, he expected the end of the world too, and he was wrong. Get over it. He blew it. A very conservative scholar like John Mayer thinks he never said that one, and I think he's right, to be honest with you. But let me, for the moment, everyone, including Jesus, thought the rule of God was going to come to its consummation soon. But here's what I want to say. As I understand what Jesus is saying, and what Paul is saying, and what John's gospel is saying when he says the Logos is incarnate, he said the rule of God has already begun. Get with the program. That's the message of Jesus by talking about God's rule being here, like a mustard seed. That's the message of Paul by saying that the resurrection has begun with Jesus, 1 Corinthians 15. That's the message of John saying the Logos is now incarnate. The Logos is the intelligibility of the universe, incarnate in Jesus. Every one of them say that. Every one of them was wrong about the end of the world. Now, if their only message was, pray, be ready, because the end of the world is coming soon, then they're all wrong, and I haven't the faintest idea why they're still around. But let me give you a parable. It's a kind of a crude one. Supposing in January of, let me go totally mythical. Once upon a time, there were two kingdoms. I'll keep it old. There were two kingdoms. Both of them were infected by a serious contaminant disease. Okay. The king of the first one said, every one of us should wear a mask. And if every one of us wears a mask, this will be over in 3 months. Okay. The other king over here says, I don't think it's going to be over in 3 months. This is silly. Let's just not wear a mask and some of us will die, and that's life. Now, at the end of a year, it took a year. The first guy was wrong. He was wrong about the date. He was wrong about the time, but only 1,000 of his people were dead. The other guy was right about the time. Yeah, it's going to take a year or so, a year and a half. And 100,000 people were dead. You can be really right about the message and wrong about the time. You really can. And Jesus, let me go with him. Jesus was wrong about the time if he said it. Paul certainly was, no question. So was the gospel according to Q. So was Mark. Just about everyone. Because what Jesus said is the world is never going to change unless, he said, you start cooperating with God. God's not going to do it for you. That's the message of Jesus as I see it after a lifetime spent with him. He's saying, you're waiting for God to do it for you. God's not going to do it for you. God's going to do it with you. Now he's talking about the biblical God. Fine, I'm not going into that. So as soon as that was said, when everyone said, oh, yeah, fine, but when's it going to be over? Now, we understand. We've been through COVID. We all want to know when it's going to be over. That's a good question. But the first question is, what should we be doing now to get it over as safely as possible, as soon as possible? And those can be kind of little Mickey Mouse questions, as it were. We really want to know when it's going to be over. The message and the timing of its conclusion can be kept separately.
I want to poke in.
Go on.
I want to poke in just to get your last, as I let you go. We got a comment actually from DeFreak saying, not true, transfiguration. Now, when we talk about that Mark 9 passage that's mentioned in Matthew 16, I mean, all the Gospels even mention this issue. Yeah. John 21 tries to bring it up and say, well, he didn't say that Peter wouldn't, or that the beloved. Anyway, you know, I've heard Christians try to argue, well, that didn't fail. So they take those words, they believe those words were really from Jesus, not getting into the debate whether they really were or weren't. Let's just assume they were for the sake of the argument. Jesus isn't talking about the transfiguration. I've tried to explain this to Christians. The transfiguration is kind of like a vision, or like something that's kind of, the way I understand it, of what is to come. That there's going to be this cosmic transformation or something like that. Where do you stand on this issue? Do you think that the transfiguration fulfills that claim in Mark 9?
No, the transfiguration is a classic ascension. Now, let me just look at the scene. The two people who are there are Moses and Elijah. Anyone who knows the tradition, because now Moses in the Bible, of course, as you know, at the end of Deuteronomy, is died, but nobody knows his grave. So both Philo and Josephus in the first century said he was taken up to God. So the two great ups to God are Elijah. Enoch was too, but he's too far away. Elijah and Moses. So along comes these two with Jesus. Jesus is ascending. This is Mark tucking an ascension story back into the time of Jesus. And then he says afterwards, don't tell anyone about this until the resurrection. There is a movement. This is back to my challenge question, that those who talked about ascension, which may have been the first response to the vindication of Jesus, want to turn it into resurrection. But resurrection, again, I repeat, is a Pharisaic, sectarian view. It's separate from. So I see that as Mark using what he knows as a classical ascension story. He doesn't want to put it at the end because that's not what he wants to say. Mark wants to give his refugees a story which is hopeful, but not Pollyanna. Oh, Jesus had a hard day on Friday, got a day off on Saturday, came back on Sunday, everything was fine. Mm-hmm. Mark knows you don't tell refugees that type of story. Matthew can tell it. Luke can tell it. John can even tell it in his own way. Mark is talking to refugees who know that no, they left Jerusalem and everything wasn't fine. They didn't get everything back. So Mark wants to end up with a hope, but not Pollyanna.
That's one of the things that's interesting in that passage as we're going is that he says, some of you standing here will not taste death until the Son of Man comes in with his angels. I can't remember. I think that's Matthew adding the angels, but that he's pretty much clearly saying that some of them would die. Like some of you won't, but some of you would.
Yeah.
It seems like if it was the transfiguration, you wouldn't be saying this, that some would die, meaning some wouldn't.
No, they're alive.
That's 6 days later or 3 days later, or however many days after this happened. So that's why I try to explain to Christians, like, you wouldn't like say, hey guys, by the way, you're all going to be alive in 6 days. And you're going to say, he's saying some of them won't be alive by that implication. So anyway, maybe this is the author Mark inserting Pauline apocalypticism into the mouth of Jesus. Don't know where you stand on that, but anyway, I really appreciate you. Let's give your book a plug. Let's give your book a serious plug. If people want to go to heaven, okay, if you really want to go to heaven and you don't want to cook, okay, in the barbecue of God, you may want to get Render Unto Caesar. Mind you, this is the demiurge we're talking about, so we're getting a little Gnostic here, but definitely get the dang book. This book is fantastic. I can't brag about it enough, Dom. I've listened to it multiple times as I drove across the country recently again. And I had to call you. Remember, I was like, Dom, yes. I'm excited. This is amazing.
Where did you call me from that time? You were somewhere between here and Washington.
I was, I think I was in Wisconsin, or I was in Nebraska. I had this long state. I was just, yeah.
Oh. Well, at least you're not in Kansas anymore.
That's true. Kansas. Well, see, Kansas, I got confused when I went through Kansas City thinking I was in Kansas, which I'm not in Kansas. But yeah, I even asked my wife, I said, I mentioned Dorothy from Wizard of Oz, and I was like, she was in Kansas. This all took place in Kansas. And then come to find out, there's actually a legend that developed later through rumor that it was a specific city in Kansas that someone in the 70s came up with. Really interesting how even we create those things. But I hope people will get the book. It's a fun read, and it was very educational, if at least to get into the Sibylline oracles, talking about the resurrection of Nero, or the revivification, however you want to call it, and how this plays in Revelation with the resurrection of Jesus, or not the resurrection, sorry, the return. But it does play a role into the resurrection, because he's the lamb who was slain, and who is the beast who was slain and is returning. So there's some overlap here. I love what you did here.
Yeah.
Get the dang book, and also consider checking out his Facebook page. If you want to go to heaven, we already talked about it, buy the book. But if you want a mansion in heaven, go like his Facebook page. And if you want anything your imagination can offer you, check out MythVision's Patreon. I'm working hard. In fact, Dom, I must share something that I haven't shown anybody that is not on the Patreon yet, but I want to give a little sneak peek so people have an idea. I'm sharing this. You don't know this either, because we did a lot of recordings when I was in Florida with my family. Right here is Dom number 5 video, number 6 video, number 7 video, number 8 video. Oh, I'm sorry. And number 4. None of these have been edited. I haven't had the time. I've been remodeling my mom's house and then getting all that ready. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 videos in 4K that we interviewed about the book, and on that couch that will be on Patreon.
6 hours, didn't we? We did about 6 hours or more.
We did a lot. We did a lot. And in fact, I think there's 1 or 2 videos on the Patreon right now that I never dropped on public on YouTube. So I will be getting these edited. I will be getting them on. It's not just you that I did this to. I also did it with James Tabor recordings. Let me pop that joker open for a second here to show people.
Give him my best when you're together in Jerusalem. Give him a hug for me, okay?
I will.
I've never met Neil. You can give him a hug too.
Absolutely. Here's the Tabor ones that I did, and I've got 1, 2, well, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then the
Wow.
13th is actually on a nail. So we did 12 recordings that day. I drove all the way to Charlotte. I have to edit those, get those on the Patreon. I've got courses that I've done with Tabor on the
Yeah, and you're
Gospel
going
of
to do
Mark.
series. You're going to do series, like they have series on Netflix and that. Do a series of podcasts.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to I've got courses too with James Tabor on the Gospel of Mark. We go into that. He teaches that. We'll be offering those courses for people to check that out. And also the Quest for the Historical Jesus we did with Dale Allison. I'm saying this on record while we have 180 people watching. I want to somehow get you to come to me in Washington and have you and your wonderful wife come stay with us. I've got the studio set up for academics such as yourself. We even have the apotheosis room. So if you enter that room, enter at your own risk. But I want to do courses with you so we can, chip away. And anyway, these are things I want to do with you before you leave Earth, if you will.
Okay, please. I'm not planning it immediately, but there are statistics pointing in certain directions.
It's kind of evolution, right? It's kind of what has to happen. And I want to get you before that happens. So, Dom, thank you. Do you have any encouraging words or something you'd like to say to our audience before we let you go?
Oh, I really would like to thank you for those questions. Honestly, I don't know if I talk too much, but I'm going to blame you. If the questions are not good, I can get over them fast, but thank you for your questions. And, I have to believe that there's people out there. I don't see anything except my own favorite library behind me, as it were. In virtual background, courtesy of my wife. She put all the books and made that virtual background. But really, thank you very much for your questions. I think these are questions that we have to wrestle with. And that's the hope, that we are wrestling with serious questions and doing it seriously.
Dom, you've been just a blast. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on here. I hope everybody's seeing the books in the background. Go to Amazon. I've got the links in the description. His Facebook page is in the description. But go to Amazon, search for some of his books. You can find them used even on Amazon. But get the Render Unto Caesar so you're up to date. And that way, when I have Dom back on, you're going to have good questions because you've read it. And nothing better than knowing what you're working with and then asking the questions.
Thank you, Derek, and thank you, everyone. And good evening, if your time zones are right for evening.
Well, can I say something real fast as I let them go? Some of you watching this right now will not taste death until you see Derek open the scrolls, which have the academics' names. And Dom, your name is on there somewhere. So thank you so much. Never forget, we are MythVision.